So we spoke with Jess Kilubu, a dear friend of both of ours, a really dynamic human and is doing really beautiful work in the UK here in London, but also in the Congo. And Jess grew up as a French Congolese second generation immigrant. He just shares so much in common with Joao and I as a creator and as an immigrant, and you know, the connection with yourself and what you're making is so crucial, and I think he's so aware of that.
Jess is always such a joy to talk to because he's like gives back as hard as he takes, you know, and I think he's a person who knows very well what is important to him and what are the things that actually that move him and that make him do the things that he wants to do. His work is a perfect example of that. He does beautiful furniture work and a lot of other things that you will talk about in the interview. So I hope you enjoy it.
You were talking about process and trying to describe process a bit simpler, and you were saying that for you, it's a part of what you're doing is about defining how you do it, because as you said, you know, you're not trained as a designer, and you're going from, well, I make something, I'm good at craft, I like craft, and you've got a real aesthetic eye, and then and then how do you so basically saying that how do I become a designer then with that background? I'd be curious to hear what does that mean to you to become a designer? What is it about building your process? What does that look like?
I want to hear the 5-year-old question before.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we were because we had said to you.
The question is how would you describe your work to a 5-year-old?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna use my nephew Noam, who's 9 years old.
Yeah, because you kept wanting to say process and textiles, and
9-year-olds is better. I prefer because they couldn't. Yeah, 9-year-old is better. Five is like.
Yeah, a very intelligent 5 years old.
Yeah.
So
Well, with 5, you really gotta simplify.
Visual simplification.
Yeah. Can't use words like textile and process and. Yeah. Which, maybe not with a 9-year-old either.
Yeah.
But anyways.
Well, it's interesting that I chose to use those words at the beginning because they're very design type of language and literature words. So what do? I build furnitures. So mostly I build chairs. I started by building chairs in the evening, taking classes. Not calling myself a designer. I think it took me a while to call myself a designer. I was more
What did you study?
interested. I studied philosophy and finance, so nothing with my hands, and I wanted to use those at some point, but also use a certain aesthetic applied to interiors and other stuff. So I build furnitures, I make furnitures. I do two kind of pieces. I do new furnitures, so building something from scratch, something that did not exist before. So I got a piece of wood, I turn it into a table, a chair, something like this, or I upcycle. And the whole idea is about giving something a new life. So you've got an old table, an old chair, an old sofa. What do? I kind of rebuilt it. Give it a new life, add it my aesthetic, my identity to it, my eye, and then you may be able to use it again. You don't realize it was an old chair, but it's for you to enjoy.
Yeah,
totally
not at all.
new thing.
So, but you turn it into like a piece of art, which is completely out of context.
Or I turn it into a new piece of furniture or something new.
Okay.
The whole new cycle, new life type of thing.
Okay.
They're very functional. I mean, they're really beautiful pieces of work, but they're also like, oh, okay, it's a nice comfy chair, and which is how it was originally designed, anyways, to be a nice comfy chair.
Nice comfy chair, yeah.
But I that's a really honest and quite vulnerable thing that you said about. It took a while for me to call myself a designer, and I knew I was creating something that was useful and that I enjoyed or that I liked, but at what point did you say, "Oh yeah, you know what? I don't care anymore. I'm a designer, and I'm gonna say that I'm a designer."
Yeah. I don't exactly remember at what point or at what stage. I guess it started when I had people validation. And validation, oh cool, your product is cool, I really like it. When they started to buy it as well, it's something important. That was nice when they were starting to enjoy it. But I think it was a particular event for the South Bank Center, or at least one I can recall. And someone came into my space and started smiling, and you had the whole face kind of, opening and getting light. And wow, I love what you do, and I love your aesthetic, I love your world. And I think that was a great validation, and said, okay, cool. Maybe I'm a designer, not because someone liked it, but just the fact that they acknowledge there was a creation.
You made them express it as well,
yes.
So yeah, absolutely.
So
What do you think the reluctance was originally to anoint yourself or to adopt that as an identity?
Well, it's typical study thing. So I studied philosophy and finance, and in France you don't get the title if you don't study in the field of area of the job you have today. So I was reluctant in calling myself a designer because I didn't study design or any creative field whatsoever. But also because I was surrounded by other designers, in craft or social graphic design, that type of stuff.
Well, your partner is a graphic designer.
Yeah, my partner is a graphic designer. Because I was also impressed by the creation power they have. That I didn't have at the time, and that's why I was not calling myself such.
Yeah. And Jess Kilubu, and you sell your products under the name Kilubukila, and as you said earlier, you have been able to use your identity as a way to express yourself, or you express yourself through your collective identity, which is your parents are from the Democratic Republic of Congo. They moved to France. And then had you not much long after, so you bring a kind of French and Congolese identity to the work, and then on top of that you're doing other pieces of craft work, and you've got a few other cultural projects, one of which is selling importing and selling Congolese honey, which is really beautiful, and with an intention, as you said, to eventually do development projects, work locally with people in the Congo, and make sure that profit, money, skills, etc. are kept in the country as part of that process. I would be curious to hear, because you said something about obviously through the things that you create, a lot of this mash of identity comes out in that creation. I'd be curious to hear what your perception of that is, and how do you describe that?
Big question.
Yes, a small little question there.
Well, it's an interesting one because I think, like we were talking earlier about your second generation. Well, you would call yourself first generation, more or less first, second. Your parents came, then you were born. And which is the same as me, and I guess on some level as you as well, Joao, where
a little bit different,
slightly differently,
probably
but
maybe my brother, me.
Your brother,
I came here, I was already pretty much like an adult, so
right. And so this kind of like mix of worlds of living in the kind of the home country, but also being very, very closely linked to the home country, the old country, and the culture associated with that does manifest itself in a whole range of ways. And for me, and my background was very much about food and about the kind of tight knit community that is the kind of culmination of Roman Catholicism and the dinner table and all these things. So for me, it comes out in my own ways and manifests itself in a range of different things. But I'd be curious to hear kind of what comes up for you and how that works with the works.
Yeah, I think it comes in a sense of freedom. The fact that I don't have a label, I don't have a title. The fact that my identity is multiple gives me a lot of freedom to experiment, to do what I want, to kind of free myself from a particular set of rules. Gives me also a lot of confidence to experiment, to explore. Because growing up, I was also always, different, which means I was always more to a Franco-French, was, it's got grandmother, like 20 minutes drive, or, you always go for Easters or family stuff. So I think from my practice, it gives me definitely freedom and confidence in exploring new ways and making sure they work, because I'm confident, because, my identity worked. So multiplicity is definitely an add-on. It'll be that way. So yeah.
What does that look like?
Would you say that, like, to find yourself as an individual, it's like going through that realization that you can, like, go and take so much from those different spaces that you grew up in?
Yeah, definitely. I take it in a sense of wave, because obviously I imagine it's the same pattern for a lot of second generation immigrants. You grew until you're a teenager. You're trying to adapt. You're trying very hard to adapt.
Yeah.
But the people in front of you are showing your difference in the face. It's some parents telling you, okay, yeah, you're French, but where are you really from? Or you've got something different. So what it is? But because you're a kid, you're trying to adapt desperately. And then growing up, you're a teenage year. You realize it's actually okay to be different. It's actually nice to be different, because I've got something else to add. And then becoming an adult and thinking about what you want in life, what's your expectation, what you want to do. That's, I guess, well, for me it was the time for reconciliation of all that, and making sure it was okay. I was confident. So I did philosophy because I kind of wanted to take a step back on the world and think about all that. I didn't really want to go for vocational studies to start with, just because I needed to figure myself and take the liberty of doing that. And I think intellectually it equipped me to kind of I guess be moving to finance firstly. I did finance for a while, but also new technologies today, and also fusing my practice as a designer, my practice as a cultural worker on the ground, and being that link that I want to be between the Western world, France, the UK, and Congo. And I think that's what my generation, that's what the second generation can have, or at least an African second generation.
Yeah.
You know what? It just occurred to me, like, I just kind of see like this pattern of that from like this small little bit that we just talked about your life, that you go in. It's almost like you go into a space, and then there's like some some friction, and then like you take in that friction and you readapt. And then, like, but it just seems to me like it's almost like a theme in your life. It just you go, you take this thing, there's this friction, and then
you absorb it, you make it yours, and then hopefully you kind of get out better in the way, are more enriched.
Synthesize all the stuff that just came in.
The one that I think is really interesting is, and I imagine for you this must have been quite, it's quite like, I mean, I say the word black and white, but the fact that at some point you would have realized, as you said over and over, that people are asking where are you from, and at some point you say, okay, well, I'm French, but obviously I've got this kind of, as you said, I'm a bit different, and there's something that's really beautiful, and actually there's a benefit to that. How was that process for you, from what you remember, and was there defining moments where you thought, okay, actually, like, this isn't a bad thing, that I'm not I don't look like you, and I'm a bit different,
and it's okay. Well, I think entering high school, I was, I think, very arrogant in my difference. And I happened to also be sometimes clever with, than the other kids.
Yeah.
So I was, being super arrogant with them. I'm different, but it's okay. You've got something that makes you actually boring. And then after finishing high school, I went to the UK for the first time. And it was very interesting arriving in London, being 18. Before that, I understood what being an African was because, growing up around Congolese culture, the parents, the food, the music, all this stuff, like the famous Congolese rumba, that type of thing was very interesting. But then arriving in London, I think it was the first time that I had the experience of being a black man. And that was quite liberating. And, for me, it was quite clear that African is something that you look at. It's your past, it's your roots, that's where you come from, that's your history. And being black, that was something much present. And it's got something of a black identity in Europe instead of Congolese only, yes, because it's a shared experience across black people around the world. But was also liberating, and that was quite cool. It was quite cool. No one was asking me, where are you really from? And that was okay. I was just,
interesting,
a guy, and I happened to be black, right. And other black could understand what being black was. But white people can also understand, and others. So that was quite interesting.
Is there something there? Do you feel like about French culture and English culture? Mm-hmm. Or do you felt like that was because partly that you just grew up around the Congolese culture, so that was always very present. Whereas maybe here, there's less Congolese.
Yes, less Congolese, definitely, and because the colonization. So. France had a lot of African former colonies, that type of thing, which I knew. They would speak French. The Franco-Africa is still very strong, so you still have those ties. The style is very, very strong.
Like the Portuguese, pretty much.
It's like the Portuguese, definitely. And in England, because I was not from a former colony, it was much more liberating. There was, the black people in England is different. He's Bangladeshi, he's Indian, he or she is Indian, so...
Somali, Nigerian.
Nigerian, Ghanaian. So
sorry, I just want to bring back because I just have this question. You said that when you were in high school, you you're obviously a pretty smart guy. So like, did you sort of like use that as some form of, because you said that you were like really arrogant about the whole you being black thing. So and I was just wondering, did you ever like use your smarts to sort of like push out, or like to like did I not get that right, or has it got anything to do with that?
Well, high school was interesting in two ways, because it was in the city centre of Lyon, so a very posh school, a private school, not private in the British way, but like privately funded.
The American way, maybe.
I guess so. And so me being an immigrant from mostly kind of a working class background, so you've got this socio-economic factor, and then I guess from my generation, from my level, I was maybe the only black guy in the school. So you had two things. So it was almost a question of survival.
You mean in your year?
In my year,
okay,
so it was almost a question of survival. I had to be arrogant, otherwise, I would lose my identity. I would get, pushed, and Africa was never on the topic. For dissertations or that type of thing, you had only one way of thinking, which was very linear, which was very monolithic. So I kind of posed myself in, why not championing everything, because I'm a social champion in that school. I'm a cultural champion in that school, so I might as well, use all that and trying to bring something different, which is the only thing I can bring if I don't want to lose myself. Yeah. Otherwise, I had to adapt, and then which means, forgetting who I am. Really.
What do you think supported your distinction between the others? I mean, besides just your skin color, because obviously you would have been in this immigrant working class household. What was it about that experience that also maybe gave you a different perspective, or allowed you to see things differently, or maybe be able to challenge that, as you said, that kind of linear thinking that was going on?
Well, I guess an exposure to a different world, and growing up, and having your parents starting to speak like a different language. Right. They would speak Lingala, they would speak Kikongo. You had guests, my family is very religious, so you have guests from the church, quite high rank. So I remember having discussions about, you know, the Big Bang Theory and, you know, where it sits against the Bible with the bishop, and I was like 10 years old, so that type of thing, and but it really opened people, and that was super cool. So just that was really cool, actually, yeah. And just being exposed to something different, so which means you've got something different to say, and this is, you know, just about you.
It's amazing. It's funny because I was just in Bristol last week with someone who we've also had on the podcast, Jess, the other Jess Thompson, from My Grateful, and her dad is a professor of primary care and medicine, and her mother is kind of like the person in integral medicine in the entire country, and her the family's just very kind of well educated and like very well read, and every meal is some kind of in-depth discussion about the Big Bang Theory, about universal credit, about the state of the NHS and health, or, you know, like anything you could think of.
Which is interesting. It's a training for life, actually.
It's fascinating, man, and it's totally the opposite of anything I've ever experienced.
Very big ideas,
as a family.
Ideas driven.
Yeah, it's just big. Let's just talk about big ideas and eat our roast. You know, it's like, it's extraordinary.
Make your identity.
But so you felt like then that it sounds like, and I love this because I think the conversation around diversity becomes so linear and becomes so much about, are you a man or a woman, are you white or black, when actually the conversation about diversity, and this is so important for teams, for obviously for creativity and your ability to challenge and be different and try new things, it's not just about that. It's about language. It's about cognition. What are you exposed to? It's about what kinds of conversations are you having. It's about exposure to also different types of cultures. It wasn't just that you were in a Congolese context. You were also in a Christian context, and you were also mixed that with the fact that you were living in France. And I think the conversation around diversity is really limited at the moment. And
I think it's like we're talking about diversity as political, when it should be.
It's not a game of opposition.
Yeah, it should be about the person more than anything. Of course, we've got like influences, but like I think it's just talking about the that on the political level is just too surface.
It's just limiting. It's just really limiting. Yeah.
Look at your experience. Like, how many other black dudes do you know that have gone through a very similar experience? Not a lot, obviously, because you just told me that.
Well, I imagine there are a lot, actually, but the problem is we don't talk. We don't have a platform. You know, it's not only black people. It can be, you know, Italian descent. It can be Portuguese.
What I mean.
It's just we don't talk. We don't have a platform to actually share that experience, and because they're viewed just on an opposition point of view.
I mean, for me, like, I don't. Yeah, there are people with similar experiences to mine, but like, I don't. Yeah, I mean, I guess as you grow up as well, you get a little bit more. How'd you say? What's the word? Idiosyncratic, right? So then it just becomes.
What do you mean by that?
You're a mix of very different things, and those things create you as an individual. Yeah. And then yes, of course you are influenced by the culture or by the space that you're in, the surrounding, your school, like how were you educated? Who did you went to have talks with? You know, like you went to have talks with the bishop about the Big Bang, like you know, like all these little things they join together to create you, like as a mature
person.
So that's what I mean about the talking about the political side. Yeah. Like just talking about this on a political level is just not deep enough.
I guess
in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's also really interesting because then from what I'm hearing as well is that diversity only individual idiosyncrasies, as you're saying, only really are useful if you are able just to be yourself, right? If you're able to draw on all these pieces, and you know, even if you're a white male and you, like myself, you can draw on the fact that you're from an immigrant South Mediterranean family, that you've grown up in Silicon Valley, which is also incredibly diverse and quite a unique place, and you've traveled and you've done these things. The only way that they actually manifest or actually are useful is if you just live them and you're not ashamed of them, or you just acknowledge them, or which is maybe the challenge around diversity, is that a lot of people just don't end up living themselves. They don't end up kind of being okay with all those pieces, all those kind of idiosyncratic pieces. Which brings, I think, back to something that you said earlier, which was about freedom. And you said, at some point there was it just kind of provoked, or it just reminded you, or you realized that actually I can just be free, and I can just be a designer, and how about that? Well, what? Because I imagine also a lot of people listening, and generally I think this is a big topic in the podcast, which is like, what does that transformation, or what does that evolution look like, where you just at some point become free to just say, I am Jess, I'm French Congolese, I'm this, and I'm also a designer. How do you feel that?
The designer philosopher.
Well, that's too ambitious. I can't say that yet. But I think it's still it's an ongoing process. You've got this very, very, very empowering process about you being confident and starting to put your work out there, getting validation from people, getting critique from people as well, being strong enough to take both. But also being able to doubt yourself and almost criticizing yourself, but from human perspective, so positive critique, and being able to, kind of reinvent, and, it's, I guess, a virtuous circle. And I guess that's what's giving me this confidence. But I think I evolved faster when I started talking to other designers or other practitioners to put a broader perspective, and being able to be vulnerable and have that conversation sometimes, and said, what do you think about that, and not being too shaky, pretending not to be, still now. And that's idea.
Do you feel like that was just about getting stuff out in front of people?
Sometimes it's just about time, and you can always perfect things. It's very good to be a perfectionist, but just go out there and face the world, because otherwise it's there's no point of doing what you do, especially if you're thinking was going to be, well, who you're working for. For instance, me, I'm hoping I'm working for the guys, for my team in Congo, and the broader team, but also working for some consumers in Africa, in Europe, in the US, etc. Who you're working with, is also a good way to call yourself something.
I'd like to ask like a little bit more specifically about that, because I think I'm going through a similar process where I'm finding out that the more I let myself show that to other like filmmakers, in my case, look, I actually think you're better than me. Like, sort of, here is what I'm doing, and like, please just, can you like give me some criticism about that? Like, how did you get to that conclusion? And I mean, because for me it was quite difficult to understand that.
Well, there is a very good example. So last time when I was in Congo, I took some time of my project to look at my father's affairs. So he's running agricultural business. He's helping farmers on, to increase the production in terms of qualities and quantity, then transporting from agricultural center to city centers, selling those in his trucks and in his kind of depot centers, and then bringing back some manufacturers' products to the countryside. For 2 days we sat down with his teams, and the idea was to kind of do kind of an audit about the whole process. So where are the risks? Who's waiting them? Who do we work for? What do we do? Etc. So we end up doing a very interesting value proposition on, you know, okay, this is VVV, the name of the corporation, and we actually work for the agricultures. That's what we do. We have you guys in mind, and you guys are our customers.
So for the farmers then?
Yeah, for the farmers.
This
And sorry, should.
no worries. No worries, man.
Technical difficulties. Cut.
Jeez.
So
Fucking, who asshole has their phone on? So you're saying that the proposition was to the farmers.
yeah, the propositions evolved from for a solidarity development to, you know, if I'm translating literally, it means we'll deliver your product faster, better, stronger type of thing. Right. And it was quite good because we had in mind the final, you know, the final beneficiary of the guy. So the guy we were working for. So to come back on my practice, and I think it was the same realization. I'm making chairs for someone, or I'm making a product for someone, and I want that person to ideally have an emotional reaction to what I do, ideally a positive one. I love your product, or, you know, I'm sitting on your chairs, it's super comfortable, and see, I'm gonna take it. So realizing that I'm making something for someone and not just, you know, out of, you know, myself or out of pride or out of something, I think it gave me more confidence to be able to approach some other designer that I know were very good, and okay, what do you guys think about this? I made this, you know, it's not perfect, but I think it's good. I think people are going to like it. I like it myself, but, you know, can you tell me from your perspective and from you know, your practice and your experience, how is it, and how is it going to do?
So you felt like the realization that, oh, actually I'm creating something for someone to have some kind of emotional connection to this thing.
That's amazing.
Therefore, I want to make sure that it's good, kind of thing. Was that the?
Well, not that. I always want to make sure that it's good. Sorry, it was not clear, but it meant it was less about me, and it was more about, you know, the delivery of something. Sure. It was about the project. It was about the product. It was about the design. So it was less, you know, kind of, you know, an egocentric thing. And that's my answer. I don't say that, you know, you're egocentric, but it was less about me, and that was liberating. That was, you know, kind of freeing.
It's very illuminating, actually. Thank you for that.
It's a really valuable way to look at it, actually. And one thing that I always try to support teams to think about is absolutely what is the vision and the intention of this project, and what are we trying to do? Who are we serving, and why would that person want to be involved in our product, our service, our space? And this was something we talked to Jen and Jeff about, which was on another podcast, which is about, ultimately you're trying to create something for someone to have, as you said, kind of an emotional or a meaningful experience. And the only way you can do that really is if you go try to understand their experience and you take yourself out of it, which is not an easy task. How did you find when you first started that? Was that something that you had to kind of build up, or was it so obviously clear that it was never really an ego issue? It was...
No, I had to build up. Sadly, there's always going to be an ego issue, which means, you know, you're always going to be to go, you know, a bit further, a bit deeper, a bit better in your practice. But yeah, obviously I had to build up. Yeah. And I think it led me to the experimentation on my atelier, the one I'm trying to build. It led me to understand that, you know, I'm just part of the problem, and I'm just part of the solution. I'm just going to be part of the work. So it's nice because it puts the designer not in the center, not, you know, the recipient or the delivery, just part of the whole thing. Yeah. And to me, today that's my exception of what should be a designer. It should be, you know, just helping, processing, like almost a facilitator. Yeah. I guess, you know, and you bring some knowledge, you bring some experience, but, you know, sit down, and it should be horizontal, and you're working with people, you're working with tools, you're working with material, and you know, that's for me the essence of, you know, what you should do.
Is it like, so you would say it's something like Yeah, I like that what you just said, that it stops being you are the center of whatever is being created, and then what is being created becomes the center, and you just and so first of all of that weight just gets lifted, which is amazing, and then yeah, you can just operate with the project with that's the thing that is in mind. I really like that. Really like that.
Yeah. Okay.
It's, and I guess like this all, we talked a bit with Hui about this as well, that you know, as a director you are creating a vision, and there is a real user at the end, and that person has to be at the core of whatever you're creating, but the moment he becomes a filmmaker, then it's less for him. He felt like it was less about who the end user was, because it was more of just wanting to be an expression of who he was.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. And I guess for you, you are doing craft and doing furniture, and it should serve a need. It should serve a functional need.
Yeah.
But there's also this like, there's all, you know.
This is the moment I should show pictures of my chairs. You can sit on it tomorrow.
You could actually sit on it.
They're functional.
Like an army.
Well, I you know, like, you see some of these tables where you can like knock them over with your finger, you know, but they look fucking brilliant, you know. Well, I guess the question then is, what's the balance for you then? Because the chairs are gorgeous, the work is really beautiful, and it has such a beautiful contrast of these kind of like classic bistro French chairs, and the wood, and then also with these really bright, really beautiful, really strong African colors and prints, which captures, I imagine, quite a bit of you as well in there. And so how do you balance that then as someone who's doing craft and doing, it's a piece of art, they're really beautiful, but also that they need to serve this need.
Well, in my practice, I think that they've been so far two moments, and I'm still on the second one. So I started by making those chairs, you know, with very bright colors. So taking a typical Western design, so the tonnet bistro chair, which you can see, you know, in cafes all over Paris or Vienna, that type of chairs, and I apply to it a piece of African furniture fabric as upholstery. So the idea is just to put on a classic Western design some African touch, and you know, how do you look at it now? Can it be added to the story of the classic bistro created in the 70s, and can it add like an African identity to it without denaturing, you know, the Austrian identity, or can we you know, is there a shift?
Is it like an evolution, or is just
is it something natural, or is there a shift? Yeah, we don't know. I think it can fully continue, which is interesting, because it means socially that, you know, an Austrian or, you know, French guy can also be an African guy. So that's kind of the position I take from my chairs. But I was taking Dutch wax. So prints, Dutch wax, which is, you know, prints and fabrics which is made in the Netherlands. Historically, it's taken from Indonesia. I think in the early 1910.
The wax itself was taken from Indonesia.
The technique, and then, you know, all the kind of batik, all the kind of print had been taken in Africa, but today it's produced in the Netherlands.
Okay.
It's a strongly African print because it's worn all across Africa. But I also wanted to move out to, you know, having the value added on the African continent, and having something also more traditionally African. So those chairs are really nice because they were a really good introduction into, you know, facing the outside world. This is what I do, but also walking a bit on the trend. African wax is becoming quite famous at the moment, and I was the only one, or maybe one of the few, to apply it to furniture. So it's a very good entrance card in the world. And now I've evolved into Cuba textile. which is very interesting textile because it's made out of raffia leaves.
Oh, nice.
So it's a vegan, it's organic, it's very good, but it's also strongly Congolese. I think the Kuba tribe, which part it's originating from the oriental part of Congo, started to do this probably 600 years ago. So, strongly rooted in their identity. You had a lot of, you had Picasso's, was interested in Cuba, you had Miro, you had a lot of, those abstract painters. I'm really interested in that, so I wanted to take this because it's strongly Congolese and see, how it will do. So we've been making cushions, we've been making rugs, still experimenting on those, but I'm quite happy to the results today. And this is, I think, a second kind of, wave of products which are more strongly rooted in my Congolese identity. So I've moved from like global African to more Congolese. And it's interesting in terms of color. It's much darker. It's more earthy. It's more and it's more dusty. And Congo is dusty, but Congo is also super colorful.
This is by the way, if anybody listening to this would be interested in getting some of this wonderful furniture, it'll be in the description. So.
Yeah, we'll have the website on there.
Yeah,
which would be great.
Yeah. Thank you.
So yeah, and you were just in the DRC just in February, January.
Yeah.
So this was what, 3 months ago.
Yeah. Already.
Yeah, and this was an initial trip to start to discuss or even start to produce this kind of second wave of product, which is the Cuba traditional craft. Which in your case is pillowcases and rugs and.
I'm starting with those, yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned that this is quite an old tradition for them. This is something that they've been doing for years, generations, and also it is intimately connected with the material as well. As you said, it's a local plant.
It's a local plant which grows mainly in their regions. But also in a lot of other countries, but it's something that kids start to do. So the men plant the seeds of palm trees, then they take the leaves down. The women start working on the leaves, and then it becomes something that they do from village to village.
Do they do this? Is it a family? Is it a family economy? Like, do whole families then work potentially on this one kind of production?
Yeah. Yeah. And you can recognize the pattern from one family, from one clad to the other one, so you don't need to sign your product, which is very interesting because someone knowledgeable from the culture, from the area, would know actually where this come from.
It's amazing.
That's actually what I was gonna ask, if there is different between.
It's amazing because I off the top of my head can't think of any kind of craft or artisanry in where I'm from where you have. It's so connected to the place. This particular craft is so connected to the place. It's been around for a long time. I guess food, maybe like winemaking. Winemaking would have maybe like a similar kind of tradition where it's grounded in the earth. It's grounded in what is produced locally, and it's been going. I mean, the vines themselves are thousands of years old.
And if you know wine, you will definitely be able to
that's
tell.
the thing.
Yeah, for sure.
You have to be a connoisseur to kind of reach a different level of understanding, which is really nice.
But you can tell, like,
initiation.
Yeah, I mean, if you were like more or less well versed, you don't have to be like a enologist or whatever, but I can tell if I drink a wine from the north of Portugal or the south of Portugal.
Well, you definitely know Madeira. If you drank
Madeira,
Madeira, you would know a good Madeira.
But I mean, Port and Madeira wine, and they're all different stuff because like red is red,
Sure.
It's all still red, but like they just, some of them, they're a bit more, I don't know, they just got more strong body, or like they're, like French wine normally is like it's a lot more light and.
Sure. Well, that's fascinating then, because obviously you didn't grow up in the Congo. You would be going there as a foreigner essentially, and I imagine. Well, you've mentioned that they knew you quite well, not to be a local.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So what was that like then to go into a place that you obviously have some connection to, but you're not overly familiar with, and also to, I guess, to jump into this world of craft and culture, which also is a new world for you. And as we said, like if you're thinking about wine as a metaphor for that, like to just throw yourself into like a world of wine and not know what the hell, who's making what or how it's made, or how is that to like...
I've been a beer drinker.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot. That sounds like there's a lot of ambiguity in that. How did you prepare for that? Get on the ground and kind of like work your way through all that.
Well, if we come back to wine, which I like, I really like natural wines. So there are new generations of winemakers working with old grapes. Well, the definition is you don't have sulfate. So they're much lighter, they're a bit more juicier, but they taste very well. So I go fully for natural wine because I don't need the background, I don't need the whole knowledge. So if we come back to the freedom concept, I can definitely go into the natural wine culture because it's free, and you've got a new generation coming. They are setting their old criterias. They don't have the how do you say. They free themselves from the labeling and all the
baggage,
stuff.
The baggage of the past,
but they do have it because they've got the knowledge, but they're freeing themselves from that. And this is the same approach I'm taking from Congo. Someone was in a matter of craft. Someone who's got also a bit of a Congolese identity, but something different because I didn't grow up there. But I can bring some different concepts. I can bring some different ways of behaving, and I'm freeing myself from their own social structure, their own structural structure, that type of thing. And I think as someone we grew up in between two places or in two places, that's what I can bring. That's freedom. That's why don't you think about something? Why can't you challenge something? Because I'm free from your background, and I can bring something. I think that's what I can, and the other people like me can bring to the world, and by other people like me, I mean African Diaspora. If we choose to come back, we can bring different ways of doing things, and maybe that's our generation to take over and maybe really work for the future of Africa.
I love that because I love what you said about I can just go and I know what's important to me. So like with the natural wine, you might say, well, actually my body's important to me. I like wine. I don't want to destroy my body over wine and add the sugar and the sulfite, so I'm just going to drink wine that I think is best for my body. Or you might say, well, I want to support better agricultural practices, and so I don't need to worry really about all the other stuff. I can just focus on the values and the things that I care about, and I can make or purchase based on that. But when you go to Congo, and you say, well, I'm going to just try to bring that similar approach. I'm just going to bring my values and I'm going to try to do my best in that context. How do you do that? How do you do that in a way that doesn't completely disrupt what is already happening there for many generations culturally? And how do you work within that without, and also I've done work in international development where and there's a lot of issues in international development about going and trying to obviously impose a particular way of thinking, of doing, of working, and especially if you don't know that you're doing that. So how do you challenge yourself? How do you make sure that you do that in a way that works for them as well as you? And what was that process like for you? Or what is that process like for you in making sure that?
Yeah, making sure that works. Well, for me, it was important to the way we started the conversation when I arrived in Congo. Was by stating the values of why we're here, what do we want from it, and hopefully what are we taking out of it. And it was a round table, and it was about 14 people of us, and it was interesting that the first 3 words, or the top 3 words that came, was economic income, cultural identity, and transparency. And that was, that was the 12. That was the 12 artisans, the 2 linguists, plus me. So that was 16 people, me and my co-worker.
Your mother.
Yeah.
I do want to talk about your mom. That's why I thought let's just throw it out there.
Big subject. So it was nice because it was all of us thinking and coming and being on that table and saying, you know, this is what we want to take from it. And it was a completely different approach to what they were used to do and how they were used to work. Well, because on craft or design work, you don't ask someone, why are you here? Well, you know, obviously because I want to sell something. So that's very straightforward. But what I wanted it was for all of us to sit at the table and go beyond that, from a handcraft person, from a designer person. Why will you be taking from it? Well, for them, it was very adamant that the identity thing was prominent, was the most important. And then, you know, a different way of working, so the transparency, the horizontality that I want, and I think it's very important for the atelier. Me coming as a designer, and it was very interesting. At some point they were asking me if I was a student, you know, me with my camera and stuff. Are you doing some research work or something? But it was a bit of
Was this what the artisans were asking you?
Yeah. The one of the lead artisan, Maxime Mabridi, was asking, so it's your final year project or something? That was interesting.
That's interesting. Do you know why they asked you that? Why they assumed that?
Well, A, because I guess my mum was there, so you know, I was looking a bit younger, and B, because it was it sounded almost like, you know, interview process, a research type of thing. So not much, you know. They're used to people coming and say, I want this, I'm gonna pay this, and you know, and I'm gonna leave. Yeah. And me, I came with a different approach. I'd like us to do this. What do you think? I'd like us to do something like this. How important would it be for you? Yeah. So I was asking them to kind of, you know, give me some answers, and then we would start a discussion. So I think that's why it was like this.
Yeah. I think it's like a little bit sometimes when you're doing stuff, when you're and especially like you're crafting stuff, then if you just you repeat it, you almost like you get so involved that you even forget why all of these things, you know. And if there isn't somebody that challenges you, then those conversations don't even come to the
mind.
Topic, you know?
I guess it's important to make a note for people listening that this isn't just you going and making an order for a piece of craft that you're going to then sell in the UK. And I mentioned international development earlier because this is part of a larger collection of projects, cultural projects that you would like to do in the Congo, and one of which is around creating this atelier. And the atelier, well, this is a really fascinating piece of work because, and you and I have talked quite a bit about this, is you are trying to create something with this group of artisans and also with a few other kind of stakeholders in the area. And that is one of the reasons why this was you did need to try to facilitate a conversation about why this atelier could be useful for them. Yeah. And if they didn't find it useful, then you weren't obviously going to force them to be there. But it's really beautiful that that this resulted in a kind of collection of values or almost like a vision. Statement for what they felt like they could do with you. And so, as you said, culture was at the top of the list. Were they able to, or were you able to work with them to expand on what that meant to them? What did they mean by culture, and why was that necessarily the most important for the group and your work together with them?
I think culture, from a purely semantic way, so they from the Kuba tribe, and they're making Kuba art, Kuba crafts. So, you know, the product and their identity is the same. It's named the same. So culture is very important because, you know, this is the way they were brought up. This is what they've been doing since a very young age. I think they start weaving or using raffia at the age of 5, I think. And you know, and they keep on doing this. Culture was very important for them because at the moment there is not much of a market for their craft. So most of them are kind of moving away from it. They're moving from the village to Kinshasa, which is the capital of DRC. So they don't have any way to express that culture and that art anymore. So the culture is almost like a survival thing for them. Survival of their identity, because it's the way they express. So me coming there and telling them, let's try to use that culture, but add a different way. So I was adding kind of a language piece, and let's see, if you're able to express your identity and your culture from there, and it was very interesting. But taking a step back, so the whole project was called Mandombe Script. Exploring language and craft design collaboration in revitalizing, I still can't say it, in revitalizing the Cuba textile. Yeah, it's one of those words. So Mandombe Script, exploring language and craft design collaboration in revitalizing Cuba textile. So the idea was to pilot an atelier on the ground and having some Cuba artisans, Cuba craft people, adding a language space, so having Mandombe specialists and having designers, one social designer, my mother Beatrice, we can call her Beatrice, and myself as kind of more product. Both of us facilitating the thing on the ground. So I've explained Cuba textile. So it's the tribe coming from the Kasai, the oriental part of Congo. They traditionally make art, craft, mostly interior textile to wear for ceremonies, that type of thing. And at the moment, they don't do much because there is no market for Cuba textile. And then we have Mandombe specialists. So the Mandombe is a language created, a script, because it's only written. So it's script created in the 70s.
It's not spoken.
It's not spoken. So I'll come to that.
Sure.
So it's a script created in the 70s, and the idea was to transcribe oral languages. Traditional oral African languages or modern languages, with the view to kind of preserve African traditions, but also rights, African and black men and women culture in the future. So it's coming from, a response to colonization. You've got a bit of a religious aspect to it. But, it's all the kind of struggle, to kind of get back your identity, get back your country, that type of thing.
Yeah.
I've stripped out the religious aspect. To it, I've only taken the kind of, script language, which is very symmetrical. It's almost like logic.
It almost has
binary suite.
Yeah, it almost has it's almost similar to the Korean in a way.
Yeah.
The modernity of it, and also the kind of like structure and linearity to it.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting.
Yeah, and it's amazing because when you start explaining all those pieces and all the players, and the first thing that goes through my mind as a facilitator is, shit, man, like you get on the ground and you're European. Your mom is maybe more like them than they would consider you. There are the artisans who have their own particular culture, in which they also kind of express through the craft. Then you've got the script, the Mandombe script, which is of a different group.
A different ethnic group.
It's a different ethnic group, and not only that, it's from what you've described, it's also a different social group as well. So, in terms of kind of social hierarchy, there's a distinction there, and there's people there involved, and then obviously you've got you worked with the professor as well there, who's in design and craft, so there is another element of kind of social hierarchy. And how do you deal with all these power dynamics and all these kind of this potential like milieu of different perspectives and power, I suppose, in a way that actually in such a short period of time, I imagine that's quite a challenge. And I'd be curious to hear how that worked, especially with your mom there as and working also with female artisans. There's a whole like
power balance and
kind of complexity to that.
I think it's interesting because this is Congo. So you've got 5,000 languages. You've got probably well, not languages, but dialects. Yeah,
well, it's a massive country.
Yeah, it's a massive country. 7 times France.
Jesus.
A lot of languages, 5 official languages, a lot of ethnic groups. So this is Congo.
So much complexity.
People, but it kind of works together. Even though there's a lot of difference between Kinshasa and Goma, which is the most oriental and eastern part.
Okay.
But people are used to kind of evolve in this complexity of things, and that's okay. For the purpose of the atelier, how do you start? Well, you start by having everyone on the table, and that's where you try to build a vision. And ideally, you have everyone kind of buy in. So what we did at the end, okay, we've got these 3 criteria. That's what the Kilubukila atelier is gonna be. We're here to allow you the 3 kind of key words, the 3 kind of things. We're here to help you get more economic incomes or more incomes. We're here to promote your cultural identity, and we're here to kind of support you in working transparently, but also provide training, a kind of structure. And then you have everyone buy in, and raise your hand. Do you like it? Yes, I like it. And it was beautiful to have everyone kind of vote for what we will be for the next 3 weeks, but also hopefully the next 20 years. And as people come and go inside the atelier, having something open, but also kind of knowing where you are, type of process. An interesting aspect was the language aspect, which was key, and I think that's why I got the grant from the British Council, because a lot of people are working on textile, especially African or Asian textile, but I was bringing a linguistic aspect to it, so a strong cultural aspect. So I had interesting stakeholders, and we may come back later to that, but that's how I want my atelier to be, having interesting stakeholders sitting around the table, and let's see what we can come up with. So we had the linguistics aspects. That's where my mother was really helpful, because I understand Lingala, I understand Kikongo, but I speak Lingala like a missionary. Can you say that?
You speak it like
that's what they were
they were telling you.
Yeah, I was so upset about that. Okay, smile. It's okay.
Don't worry, my friend, the people I meet that when I speak French to them, they say that I sound like I'm from the ghetto. So don't worry.
Well, it's better. I think I'd rather be from the ghetto than
than the Western missionary.
Yeah, then nice.
Well, they referred to you as the foreigner, no, like the.
Yeah, from now and then, yeah, but it's okay, I'll never.
It's like it's almost like a sweet, like poking.
Yeah, and when an apoto, like the kid from Europe.
Yeah.
So, and that's okay. I'll never pretend to be, and I don't think I'll ever be, and that's cool. And that's
Which is all part of that dynamic, that kind of milieu.
Yeah. So how we do communicate, what language we use to communicate, but I think it was overall the generosity and the strength that people had in their own culture, be it in expressing it in your art, expressing it in the way you're talking, expressing it in your confidence, the way you dress, the way you spoke. I think people knew who they were when they were coming at the table, and I was being called a designer. I was showing them my design, how I was presenting it, etc. They really liked that. But then they were also showing me pictures of what they were doing, being very proud. This is the kind of Cuba rug I've just made. What do you think? And it was an equal conversation.
Yeah.
And it was really good. I remember because I was running, we were running, some individual interviews, and at some point we had Maman Elodie Pelenge, and I just came out of the Annie Alberts exhibition at the Tate Modern, and Maman Pelenge, she's like a master a master embroider, textile maker. She's really good in Cuba textile. So I was showing the work
she was at the Tate?
No, she was not at the Tate, but you had some Cuba textile at the Tate.
Okay.
Mama Pelengia was working with them. But then you had Annie Albert, which is a master textile maker from Germany or Austria. Excuse me if I don't have it. She was from the Bauhaus school. She wanted to go for design at the beginning, but she couldn't because she was a woman. So she had to go for kind of female artwork. So she went for textile, and she got a big name making textile, and her work is beautiful. So we started by okay, I'm going to show you the work of Annie Albers. What do you think? Yeah. And she politely said, well, I think it's beautiful. And I think it was just, a bit too early to ask that question. But then when we were going to her work, the work of Maman Pelenge, she's actually one of the only one who's creatively challenging what she's doing and the way she's teaching and, the kind of pattern they're making.
Is she Congolese?
She's Congolese, yeah, and she's I think she's one of on the few, or not to say the only one, who's been that I've met, was able to kind of integrate her culture, the Cuba tech culture in the textile, but propose new finishes, propose new aesthetic, propose new thing, and that's very interesting. From a Congolese culture, where you usually don't question the things you're doing. You usually don't question, your identity. You usually don't question the elderies and those stuff. It was very interesting to see that she was doing this, but still, she was still being a woman in that culture. So it was a bit tough to get her really what she had to say, her own voice, etc., etc. Even for my mother, it was a bit difficult because I was speaking female to female, same language fluently, same language. And,
why was it difficult for Mom?
Because she was not just used to really speak for herself. And maybe her way of expression, her way of being rebellious was, I'm just going to propose a new pattern. And this is actually my language. Maybe she was just not expressing this through words, but maybe through her craft. So, so I guess in that sense, she was a designer because she was challenging her craft practice. And, not using words, not being a social designer, but designing, challenging, an aesthetic, patterns, that type of thing. So that was quite interesting, the identity point of view from her side.
For sure.
How did that work with the artisans? Because most of them were women, and obviously you were using a script that wasn't of that culture, of the Cuba culture. So how did they take that conversation of, okay, we're going to make this thing and hopefully build some financial resilience or help you build some economic resilience, but we're going to change what you're actually making, which maybe you've been making for several generations. Yeah. How did that conversation go? I guess in light of what you just said.
Yeah, it was a very easy conversation basically because I was coming with some pre-drawings type of thing, and they had no idea of what the Mandombe was. They knew about the Kimbangist church, which is the kind of religious arm of the Mandombe, but they really liked actually the position of the Mandombe, which its ambition. Let's transcribe all African languages and let's only be spoken languages or written languages for African or Black people. They really liked that idea, and it was even more interesting and even more easy for them to apply it because, well, I was telling them. Hopefully it's going to sell and it's going to be nice and because you're talking to some people who actually don't produce anymore because they don't have any way of selling this work because they're disconnected to markets. So I was giving them an option to sell and asking their their point of view or what they were thinking about it. It was pretty easy for them to adopt it.
Yeah, and I think it's quite interesting that like people are doing stuff and it's not only in Congo, obviously, in so many places in Portugal the same, and and people are doing like these wonderful like traditional things, and they end up dying because there's no market for it. And then you go to a city like London, or to, I'm guessing, New York or something like that, and people would kill to get some of those things, but they just don't know about them. So they end up like just disappearing, and then like maybe they can be revitalized later, but it'd be much better if they can be revitalized before they die. You know?
Of course.
So
of course.
Well, what kind of discussion do they have about? Actually, maybe this doesn't work, and maybe there isn't really a market for it anymore. And what kind of discussion did they have around that about how do we adapt? What is the option, or are there no options, or was that part of the conversation as well?
Well, it was part of the conversation. So I was trying to ask that question. When you had the occasion of trying new way of making things, trying new designs, trying new products. How have you done it? And I think maybe 80% of the people said yes. Obviously we tried. You've done it. I think because they were trying to please me. And obviously saying yes to everything I was asking because I was the founder and that type of thing. And I expect once the trust will be there, we'll maybe able to have a more honest type of conversation. Makers or designers to makers to designers. Sorry. What was the question again? Sorry, I lost myself.
Well, I guess it's just about at what point do you say to them, maybe there's not a market for this?
There's not.
Or I don't know, as a question, I don't know if that's the answer or not. But.
Well, I told them that the very purpose of the pilots we're running on the ground is to try new things. So I really like what you're doing, but let's try to do it differently. Let's try to see, what will be the response from the markets. So we've all sit down, and the whole purpose was to create new products, build new things. And we've sold some in London. It worked quite well. I think the people loved it. I'm sold out. So hurry up if you want something. So that was very good. But still, and I thought about that. In midterm, I thought let's just take some of this classic stuff they're making. Let's take it, the thing that you think could be really good, because it's too easy to come and say let's just do everything differently. So I took some of the classical stuff they were making, when I thought there would be potentially some window for it to sell, and it sold, so it was quite cool.
Okay.
I was validating their past, but also validating potentially their future, or our future rather. And
Sure.
it worked. That was quite cool. But still, I think Donatien tried. He pushed me to kind of get this kind of wooden, sculpted, glass, well-studded glass, what do you say? Big glasses? How do you call them?
Like a vase.
Vase.
Like to hold flowers. Or...
not to hold flower, but to drink.
Okay, like a
callus.
So who is he?
He's a commercial guy. He's the guy who's used to kind of trade his craft and everything, so he absolutely wanted me to take those two things, which I seen. I remember my dad had some at home when we were kids. It's not going to sell. It's very good craft. It's very good work, but it's not going to sell. But maybe in the future we'll be able to take this as a base and maybe try to do something else, which would respect their craft, their technique, their identity, but also be potential opener for new markets, and building economic resilience was the top aspiration we had. So just let's keep that in mind.
In terms of going there and being part of the local economy and trading, and how did you consider, how do you make sure that you're disrupting potentially what's going on there as little as possible, or what was your thoughts about how you do as little harm as possible to the context, to the economy, to
or does it even or do you actually even need, do you think that you need to shake it up?
Because this is this happens, this is not just an international development question. This is you as a charity going into a community and delivering a service, you as an architect or a developer going in and creating a neighborhood. What's your responsibility as the designer or as the facilitator or the social designer to go in and what's your responsibility to that?
Yeah. Well, the good thing from of my project, or at least different from what you're saying, is that I was not delivering something, and we've all been co-working, co-building. We've all, you know, together tried or challenged a way of doing things, and the idea was to use your identity to make design, and, you know, moving from the traditional craft you're making, fusing with your Kuba culture, fusing with your Mandombe culture, and trying to make a design product that would be appealing for a regional market or an international market. So we were all together in the same boat, and it was just not me coming and asking you to do something, but it's kind of co-designing thing. Sadly, I was not disrupting anything because there was nothing to disrupt. The state of the art in Congo is terrible because there is no public investments, there's no private investments, so the market for uncraft is just ridiculous. You have the Biteko market in Kinshasa, which is the market for craft and design, is just sitting outside. There's no cover up, so and you can imagine the tropical rains over there. It's terrible, and yet you have, you know, the craftsmen working there. They have no support whatsoever. I went into the Ministry of Culture. It's the least dotted ministry. You've got everything falling apart, all the infrastructure. You have no money. So the good thing, well,
the building itself is
the building. So it's a literal metaphor. So there is something to do. There is a market to create because there is an identity. And this identity is strongly expressed, and you've got skilled people, you've got talented people who really want to work. So, you know, I was not destroying something, but I think we were experimenting what you know, potential or an interesting way could be.
One thing that I really appreciate about you, Jess, is that you just kind of seamlessly move to things that seem to work for you. And I think one thing that Laz said from one of our interviews, which I thought was really beautiful, was that he said, if I want to do something, I just pray and then I go do it. And I think that fits really, that kind of fits with the way I see you move through the world. And one of those things, for example, is the honey, and you are starting to seek investment to import Congolese honey and then be able to run development projects and community-based projects with the people who are producing that honey. How does this all kind of fit together? How does this project that you just run with the British Council and the craft and working with the Kuba and the script fit with some of the other aspirations for the work in the Congo?
I think we're still talking about culture. For me, we're still talking about culture. We're still talking or trying to talk about Congo in a different aspect of what it's talked today, which, you know, civil war, coltan, you know, all those, you know, terrible understanding of Congo for people. You know, oh, Jess, you're going to Congo, but, you know, it's crazy. What are you doing there? There's war,
disease and war, and
and it's actually okay. There's a lot of stuff happening in Congo, and it was beautiful to see that, you know, it has changed and people are living, and it's super dynamic. Obviously, you've got, you know, it's a developing country, so you've got these tragedies, and Congo have a lot of, you know, some of the biggest tragedies in the world. But there is still something to do as long as there is people, which is what I believe, and I believe in development through culture. So the honey would be part of that. It's about bringing an exceptional product that I've had kind of all my life and no one knows about.
Just sitting there under your nose.
It smells and it tastes good and it's beautiful and
it's extraordinary.
It's so good.
It's ridiculous.
And that's what it is about. And what if, you know, we could do that, and having, you know, people having a different first introduction about Congo, a beautiful culinary introduction about Congo, and maybe they will be interested, you know, about what Congo is, and maybe by doing so we give money to, you know, the local farmers, we cut kind of the middleman, we help them, you know, in economical prospect, as that type of thing. For me will be beautiful. Development through culture is definitely my thing.
Absolutely.
It can be agriculture.
I mean, it's a beautiful thing about food is that food. My brother is a massive proponent of this, is that food is the ultimate social enterprise because it touches all elements. It's environment, it's community development, it's the soil, it's the product itself, and it's our bodies, and then obviously
there's the social aspect.
And then obviously the business that operates that, and what the culture of the business itself and its relationship to all the people who are making the food. And there's you're right, there's an incredible opportunity to add so much value through the creation of particular foods, and it's really exciting. How do you
and the bees and the forest and all this. It was quite funny because I was filming this afternoon, and the woman just in front of me stopped, and obviously I was frustrated. Someone cut my line, but she was saving a bee, and it was just like, for the parentheses, it was quite funny. So the bees need savings, and that they're very important to the world as well. For protection of the forest, which I think will also be a part of the project, raising awareness about, conservation, forests, the animal, the way people live inside those forests, being a steward to kind of those environments, that type of thing, and, extracting what you can, but, reinvesting or respecting and, not harming, that type of thing.
It's a really... the whole thing is quite beautiful because it feels like it's your journey, your journey, but it's like a kind of hero's journey. It's your journey back, your journey back to your heritage. Like I've ended up back in Europe, which is obviously where my mom is from, and there is something that's like there's quite a homey feeling to even if it's not the same country, there's some intimacy there with the culture and the way of living, and you now are kind of on this journey of finding your way into Congo, your way back, and
you can say it.
And I just hearing you talk about it right now, I think it's like it's just kind of struck me that it is quite intimately linked to you and your families and your kind of your relationship with yourself, and where do you think about that much? Where do you feel like you're at with this kind of process and developing these projects, because they're still quite young, but there is an opportunity for you potentially to be there quite a bit and eventually, and to have a more intimate connection or relationship with that country or with those people, with that culture. And how is that sitting with you now, and where are you at in that process?
Well, I guess it's always evolving. I'm not praying every day, but I'm kind of doing it to kind of make reference to your friend. It's still evolving. I don't know exactly how it's gonna be. But it's me looking for my past and my future at the same time, and trying to reconcile my Western identity and my Congolese identity, my African identity, per position. But also me being partner with a Western woman, and where do we sit together? What's going to be the challenges, for potentially our kids, that type of thing. So it's always those kind of questions that are coming. I don't know what it's going to look like. I guess we'll need a bit of honesty, a lot of hard work, but
a lot of honesty.
A lot of honesty.
But that's also another like beautiful strength of yours, is that you can be quite challenging and quite direct and honest, and you're definitely ready to do all that.
Yeah, true. Well, because I also realize that's what I want to do in the world, and I feel like that's what I want to bring to the world, because I've got this multiplicity of identity. I can be a bridge, and maybe that's me, my generation, or my background. That's what we can do. It might be time to kind of work on reconciliations. Our parents had fun, but maybe it's also our time to do everything in a different way. And
amazing.
That's the positions I want.
Well, Jess, is there anything else that you would want to share with us before we cut out?
And what's going on with your life in terms of if people want to see your stuff or buy your stuff?
Yeah. I'm redoing my website, so you won't be able to buy from it. But from June, you can definitely buy online, kilubukila.com. You can have a look at my work on Instagram and stuff like this, and reach out. I'm really open to kind of share. If we can co-learn, if you can kind of have feedback and stuff like this, that would be great. But come to London and hopefully come visit Congo soon. And I'll be there.
If people see stuff on Instagram that they like and they reach out to you to see if it's available.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Jess, it's been really beautiful, and I've really enjoyed it, and I think there's a lot there, particularly around this, as you said, this kind of multiplicity, and I think there's a lot to chew on there for people. So thanks so much. Good luck with all the projects, and I look forward to seeing where it all goes. It's really exciting, man. Thanks.
Awesome.
Yeah, no,
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Jess.
Thank you, Joe.
All
Thank
right,
you, Nate. Thank you, guys.